The woman stepped off the stagecoach in Stillwater, Montana Territory, on a blistering August afternoon in 1883, covered in trail dust and carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel that looked like it had seen better days before the war. Quinn Garrett was halfway through shoeing his horse outside the livery when he caught sight of her, and something about the way she stood there, looking lost and determined all at once, made him pause with the hammer still raised above the anvil. She had auburn hair that caught the sunlight despite being pinned up under a faded bonnet, and when she turned his direction, he felt his chest constrict in a way it had not done since Margaret died 3 years ago. "Excuse me," she called out, walking toward him with purpose. "I'm looking for Quinn Garrett. They told me at the general store he might be here." Quinn set down his hammer slowly, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "You found him." The woman stopped a few feet away, her green eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Then she smiled, and it was sad and hopeful all at once. "My name is Willa Reeves. I believe I'm your late wife's sister." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a pistol shot. Quinn felt his jaw tighten, his hands clenching at his sides. Margaret had never mentioned a sister. Not once in their 5 years of marriage. She had told him she had no family left, that her parents died when she was young, that she was alone in the world until she met him. "Margaret never said anything about a sister," Quinn said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Willa's face fell slightly, but she did not look surprised. "I know. We were estranged for many years. I only recently learned she had passed. I came as soon as I could." Quinn should have sent her away right then. Should have called her a liar and told her to get back on the next stagecoach heading east. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she held herself, straight-backed despite obvious exhaustion. Maybe it was the familiar shape of her nose, the curve of her mouth that reminded him painfully of Margaret. Or maybe it was just the loneliness that had been eating at him for 3 years, making his small ranch house feel like a tomb. "Even if you are who you say you are, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," Willa said quickly. "I just wanted to know something about her life, what she was like, how she died. I've been searching for her for 5 years, and when I finally found the trail, I learned I was too late." The raw grief in her voice sounded real enough. Quinn studied her for a long moment, aware that people were starting to watch them from across the street. Stillwater was small enough that any stranger drew attention, especially a woman traveling alone. "I don't have much," he said finally. "But I suppose you can stay at the house for a night or two. There's a spare room." Relief washed over Willa's features. "Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden." Quinn grunted and turned back to his horse, but his mind was elsewhere now. He finished shoeing the gelding quickly, his movements automatic from years of practice. When he was done, he loaded his tools into the wagon and gestured for Willa to climb up. She did so without complaint, settling onto the rough wooden seat beside him. The ride to his ranch took 20 minutes through rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. Quinn did not say much, and Willa seemed content to sit in silence, taking in the landscape. Finally, she spoke. She always wanted to live somewhere like this, wide open spaces. She used to talk about it when we were girls. Quinn glanced at her sideways. "Where did you grow up?" "Philadelphia. Our father was a banker until he lost everything in a bad investment. He drank himself to death after that. Our mother died from pneumonia the following winter. Margaret was 18, I was 15. We tried to make it on our own, but things got difficult. We had a fight about what to do next, and she left one night. I never saw her again." The story had the ring of truth to it, or at least plausibility. Quinn had always wondered about Margaret's past. She had been reticent to talk about it, always changing the subject when he asked. He had assumed it was just too painful. "She never mentioned you," he said again, not unkindly this time. I'm not surprised. Margaret could be stubborn. If she decided something was over, it was over. I wrote letters to every town along the western routes for years, trying to find her. Finally got a response from the postmaster here about 6 months ago. By then, she had been gone 3 years already. Quinn's hands tightened on the reins. 3 years since the fever took her. 3 years of an empty bed and silent dinners, and wondering if he would ever feel anything again. They reached the ranch as the sun was starting its descent toward the mountains. It was not much, just a sturdy log house with a barn and a corral holding a dozen horses. Quinn raised and trained horses, sold them to the army and to ranchers who needed good working stock. It was honest work, and it kept him busy enough that he did not have to think too much. Willa climbed down from the wagon and looked around with something like approval. She would have loved this. She did, Quinn said quietly. We built that house together, her and me. Took us a whole summer, but she insisted on helping with every log. He showed Willa inside, pointing out the spare room that had once been meant for children that never came. The house was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. Margaret had been the one who made it feel like a home, with curtains she sewed herself and wildflowers she picked to put in jars on the table. I'll make dinner, Quinn said. Nothing fancy. Let me help, Willa offered. Please. I need to do something with my hands. They worked together in the small kitchen, and Quinn was surprised by how natural it felt. Willa moved around the space efficiently, finding things without having to ask where they were kept. She made cornbread while he fried salt pork and beans. They ate at the wooden table as the last light faded from the windows. Tell me about her, Willa said softly. Please, what was she like? Quinn set down his fork, considering. She was strong, stronger than me in a lot of ways. She could outshoot half the men in town, and she was not afraid of anything. But she was also kind. She used to bring food to the widow Jensen when old Tom died, and she taught the preacher's daughter to read when no one else would take the time. That sounds like Margaret, Willa said with a sad smile. She always had a good heart, even when life was hard. The fever came on fast, Quinn continued, the words coming easier than he expected. One day she was fine, the next she could not get out of bed. Doc Wilson did everything he could, but nothing helped. She was gone in less than a week. Willa's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Did she suffer? Not at the end. She just went to sleep and did not wake up. Quinn did not mention the delirium, the way Margaret had called out for someone named Willa in her last hours. He had thought she was confused, making up names. Now he was not so sure. They cleaned up the dishes in silence, and then Willa excused herself to her room. Quinn sat on the porch for a while, smoking his pipe and watching the stars come out. He tried to sort through his feelings about this stranger who had appeared in his life, claiming a connection to his dead wife. He still was not entirely sure he believed her, but he found that he did not particularly care. There was something about her presence that eased the constant ache in his chest, even if only slightly. The next morning, Quinn woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He dressed quickly and came out to find Willa already up, cooking breakfast in the kitchen. She was wearing a simple calico dress that looked well worn but clean, her hair braided down her back. You did not have to do this, he said. I wanted to. It's the least I can do for your hospitality. They ate together, and then Quinn headed out to work with the horses. He was training a young mare that showed promise but was still skittish around people. He was in the corral, working her on a long lead, when he noticed Willa had come out to watch. She leaned against the fence, her face thoughtful. Margaret was good with horses too, she said. She had a way of calming them down. Quinn nodded. I know, she helped me with the difficult ones. Could I try? He hesitated, then handed her the lead rope. Willa stepped into the corral carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones to the mare. The horse's ears flicked forward, and she took a tentative step closer. Within minutes, Willa had the mare eating from her hand, completely relaxed. "You were not lying about being sisters," Quinn said with something like wonder. Willa smiled at him over her shoulder. "No, I was not." Over the following days, a pattern developed. Willa stayed on, and Quinn did not ask her to leave. She made herself useful around the ranch, cooking and mending and helping with the horses. She had a natural talent for the work, and Quinn found himself looking forward to her company. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about Margaret and slowly about themselves. Quinn learned that Willa had spent the years since her sister left working as a seamstress, saving every penny to fund her search. She had traveled from Philadelphia to St. Louis to Denver, following rumors and old letters, always one step behind Margaret until the trail led her here. "What will you do now?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Now that you know what happened," Willa was quiet for a moment. "I do not know. I suppose I should go back east, find work again." "You could stay," Quinn said before he could stop himself. "The ranch could use the help, and you are good with the horses." Willa turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? People will talk. Let them talk. I am offering you honest work, nothing improper about it." But even as he said it, Quinn knew it was more complicated than that. He was drawn to Willa in a way that went beyond simple companionship. She reminded him of Margaret, yes, but she was also distinctly herself. Where Margaret had been fierce and direct, Willa was softer, more thoughtful. She laughed more easily, and her presence filled the empty spaces in his life that he had thought would stay hollow forever. Willa stayed. Weeks turned into months, and the early autumn arrived with cooler nights and the first hints of gold in the cottonwood leaves. Quinn found himself watching Willa as she worked, admiring the competent way she handled the horses, the grace of her movements as she went about her daily tasks. He tried to tell himself it was wrong to feel this way, that he was betraying Margaret's memory. But late at night, lying alone in his bed, he could not help imagining what it would be like to have Willa beside him. One day in late September, Quinn rode into town for supplies and ran into Sheriff Tom Morris outside the general store. Tom was a good man, fair and honest, and he had been a friend to Quinn since he first arrived in Stillwater. "How is that woman who showed up claiming to be Margaret's sister?" Tom asked casually as he helped Quinn load flour sacks into the wagon. "She is doing well." "She has been helping around the ranch." Tom nodded slowly. "People are talking, Quinn. You know how it is. Let them talk. I am not judging you. Hell, if I was in your position, I would probably do the same. Just be careful. You do not really know anything about her." Quinn frowned. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that a pretty woman shows up with a convenient story, and suddenly she is living in your house. It happens, and sometimes it turns out the woman is not who she says she is. Sometimes she is running from something or looking to take advantage of a lonely widower. Willa is not like that. Maybe not, but you should find out for sure. Write to Philadelphia. Check her story." Quinn wanted to dismiss Tom's concerns, but they nagged at him as he drove back to the ranch. He had taken Willa at her word without really investigating whether she was telling the truth. Maybe he should look into it, if only to put his mind at ease. When he got home, he found Willa in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile that made his chest ache. "How was town?" "Fine. Got the supplies we needed." He paused, then decided to be direct. "Tom mentioned that I should verify your story about being Margaret's sister." The smile faded from Willa's face. "Oh. I am not saying I do not believe you, but it would make sense to check, would it not?" Willa set down the brush and turned to face him fully. "You are right. It would make sense. I can give you the name of the minister who married our parents, the address where we lived. You can write and ask. You are not offended? No. I would want to know too if I were in your position. She moved closer to him, and Quinn caught the faint scent of lavender. Quinn, I care about you. I care about this life we are building here. If you need proof that I am who I say I am, I will gladly provide it. Quinn nodded, relief washing over him. That evening he wrote letters to Philadelphia, addressing them to the church Willa had named and to the bank where her father had worked. Then he put them in the mail the next time he went to town, and tried not to think about what he would do if the answers came back wrong. In the meantime, life continued. The weather grew colder, and Quinn started preparing for winter. He brought the horses in closer to the barn, stocked up on hay and grain, and made sure the house was properly sealed against the coming snow. Willa worked beside him, never complaining about the hard labor or the long hours. One afternoon in early October, they were mending fence along the northern pasture when dark clouds rolled in fast from the mountains. The temperature dropped sharply, and within minutes, sleet was falling in stinging sheets. "We need to get back to the house," Quinn shouted over the rising wind. They ran for the horses, but Willa's mount spooked at a crack of thunder and bolted, leaving her on foot. Quinn did not hesitate. He swung down from his own horse and pulled Willa up behind him, kicking the gelding into a gallop toward home. By the time they reached the house, they were both soaked through and shivering. Quinn got the horse into the barn and then rushed Willa inside. He built up the fire while she disappeared into her room to change. When she emerged in dry clothes, he handed her a blanket and a cup of coffee laced with whiskey. "Drink this. It will warm you up." Willa wrapped her hands around the cup gratefully. "Thank you. That storm came out of nowhere. They do that this time of year. We are lucky it was not snow." They sat by the fire together, watching the flames and listening to the storm rage outside. Quinn was acutely aware of how close Willa was sitting, her shoulder almost touching his. He wanted to put his arm around her, pull her close, but he held back. It was too soon, too complicated. "Quinn," Willa said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you still love Margaret?" The question caught him off guard. He considered his answer carefully. "I will always love her. She was my wife and she was a good woman, but she is gone and I am still here. I have to keep living." "And what about me?" Willa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you think of me as just a reminder of her?" Quinn turned to look at her, really look at her. In the firelight, her face was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with Margaret. She was her own person with her own strength and kindness and spirit. "No," he said honestly. "You are nothing like her, not really. You are yourself, Willa, and I am glad you are here." Willa's eyes were bright with emotion. "I am glad too. I came here looking for my sister, but I found something else, something I did not expect." "What is that?" "A place to belong, a home, and maybe more than that." Quinn's heart was pounding. He knew what she was saying, what she was offering. He also knew it was a risk. He still did not have proof of who she really was, still did not know if he could trust his feelings after so long alone. But in that moment, with the storm raging outside and Willa looking at him with such hope and vulnerability, he decided he did not care. He reached out and touched her face gently, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Willa, I do not know if this is right or wrong. I do not know if Margaret would approve, but I know I cannot keep pretending I do not feel something for you." "Then do not pretend," Willa whispered. Quinn leaned in and kissed her. It was tentative at first, uncertain, but when Willa kissed him back with equal longing, he pulled her closer. She fit against him perfectly, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. The kiss deepened, and Quinn felt something break open inside him, all the grief and loneliness of the past 3 years pouring out and being replaced with something new and fragile and hopeful. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Not as a hired hand, stay with me." "Yes," Willa said simply. "Yes." They spent that night together, and for the first time since Margaret died, Quinn did not feel alone. Willa was warm and alive in his arms, and when she whispered his name in the darkness, it was not Margaret's ghost he heard, but the voice of someone who could build a new future with him. The next morning, Quinn woke to find Willa already up and making breakfast. She smiled at him when he entered the kitchen, and he pulled her into a kiss that made her laugh. "Good morning to you too," she said. "It is a very good morning." They sat down to eat, and Quinn found himself thinking about the future in a way he had not done in years. He wanted to marry Willa properly, make their arrangement official in the eyes of God and the law. But he knew they needed to wait for the letters to come back from Philadelphia first, both to satisfy his own doubts and to stop the gossip that was surely spreading through Stillwater. As if reading his thoughts, Willa said, "How long do you think it will be before you hear back from the East? Could be a month, maybe longer depending on the mail. Are you worried?" "A little. Not because I am lying, but because I want you to be sure of me. I want you to trust me completely." "I do trust you," Quinn said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But I think we should wait to make any formal announcements until the letters arrive, just to avoid complications." Willa nodded in understanding. "I can wait. I have waited this long already." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Quinn could remember. He and Willa worked together during the day and fell asleep in each other's arms at night. She made the house feel like a home again, not by trying to replace Margaret, but by bringing her own warmth and personality to it. She hung new curtains she sewed from fabric Quinn bought in town, and she coaxed the dormant flower garden back to life despite the approaching winter. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the ranch in white. Quinn and Willa spent their evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply enjoying each other's company. Quinn taught her to play chess using a set Margaret had given him years ago, and Willa taught him card games she learned back east. One night as they lay in bed together, Willa said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Quinn felt his stomach clench. "What is it?" "When I first came here, I was not entirely truthful about why I was looking for Margaret." He sat up slightly, looking down at her. "What do you mean?" Willa took a deep breath. "Everything I told you about our past was true. We did have a fight and she did leave. But there was more to it. Before our father died, he set up a small trust for Margaret to be released on her 25th birthday. She never claimed it, and when I finally tracked down the lawyer, he said the money would go to her next of kin if she was deceased. That is me." Quinn felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "So you came here for money?" "No," Willa said firmly, sitting up to face him. "I came here to find my sister. The money was just something I learned about in the process, and when I got here and found out she was gone, I thought about claiming it and leaving. But then I met you, and I realized that money did not matter anymore. I have not even contacted the lawyer since I arrived. You can check if you want to." Quinn studied her face in the dim light. She looked earnest, even frightened that he would not believe her. "How much money are we talking about?" $500. Not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. It was more than Quinn made in a year from selling horses, but it was not an outrageous sum either. He considered what Willa had told him, weighing it against everything else he knew about her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I do not want there to be any secrets between us. If we are going to build a life together, it needs to be built on honesty." Quinn reached out and pulled her close. "Thank you for telling me. I believe you. Really, really. If you were just after money, you would have claimed it and left by now. You have been working harder than any hired hand I could pay for." Willa relaxed against him, and Quinn felt the tension drain from his own body. He realized that he truly did believe her, that somewhere along the way he had stopped questioning whether she was who she claimed to be, and started simply accepting her as she was. The letters from Philadelphia arrived in late November, just as Quinn was starting to think they had gotten lost in the mail. He rode into town to pick up supplies and found 2 envelopes waiting for him at the post office. He sat in the wagon outside the general store and opened them with hands that shook slightly. The first was from the church, written in a neat clerical hand. It confirmed that Reverend James Harrison had married Thomas and Elizabeth Reeves in 1851, and that they had 2 daughters, Margaret and Willa. Margaret had been born in 1852, Willa in 1855. The family had been members of the congregation until Thomas's death in 1870. The second letter was from the bank, more formal in tone but equally clear. It confirmed Thomas Reeves's employment and his financial difficulties, and it mentioned the trust he had established for his eldest daughter. The bank officer expressed condolences for Margaret's death and asked if Mr. Garrett could provide information about next of kin so the trust could be settled. Quinn read both letters twice, then folded them carefully and put them in his pocket. Willa had been telling the truth about everything. He felt relief wash over him, mixed with shame that he had ever doubted her. When he got back to the ranch, he found Willa in the kitchen kneading bread dough. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the anxiety in her eyes. "The letters came," he said. Willa wiped her hands on her apron, her face pale. "And," Quinn pulled her into his arms, "and you are exactly who you said you were. I am sorry I ever doubted you." Willa sagged against him, and he felt her shake with what might have been tears or laughter or both. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me. I should have believed you from the start. No, you were right to check. I would have done the same thing." She pulled back to look at him. "What now? Now we go into town and talk to the preacher. I want to marry you properly, Willa Reeves, if you will have me." Willa's face broke into a radiant smile. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They rode into Stillwater the next day, both dressed in their best clothes. Quinn felt nervous in a way he had not felt since his first wedding, but this was different. With Margaret, he had been young and uncertain about what the future held. Now he was older, tested by loss and hardship, and he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted Willa, wanted to build a life with her, wanted to wake up beside her every morning for the rest of his days. Reverend Williams was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He listened as Quinn explained the situation, nodding along thoughtfully. "I see no impediment to marrying you," he said finally. "You are both of age and free to wed. However, I must ask, Miss Reeves, are you certain this is what you want? You have only been in Stillwater a few months." "I am certain," Willa said firmly. "I love Quinn and I want to be his wife." The Reverend smiled. "Then I will be happy to perform the ceremony." "When would you like it to take place?" "As soon as possible," Quinn said. "We have waited long enough." They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of town. The ceremony was simple, with only a handful of witnesses including Sheriff Morris and his wife, and Martha Jensen, the widow Margaret used to help. Quinn wore his one good suit, and Willa wore a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes. When Quinn slipped the ring on her finger, his hands were steady and sure. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Williams said with satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride." Quinn did, and the small congregation applauded. As they walked out of the church together, hand in hand, Quinn felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was right. This was exactly where he was meant to be. They held a small reception at the boarding house, and Quinn was surprised by how many people turned out to congratulate them. Apparently word had spread about the wedding, and the townspeople wanted to show their support. Even those who had been skeptical about Willa seemed to have come around once they heard the full story. Martha Jensen pulled Quinn aside at one point and said, "Margaret would have approved. She would not have wanted you to be alone forever." "Thank you," Quinn said, moved by the older woman's kindness. "That means a great deal. Your new wife is a good woman. Treat her right." "I intend to." Quinn and Willa spent their wedding night at the hotel in town. A luxury Quinn had insisted on despite Willa's protests that it was an unnecessary expense. The next morning, they rode back to the ranch together as husband and wife, ready to start their life together in earnest. Winter settled in hard that year, with deep snows that kept them close to the house for days at a time. Quinn did not mind. He was content to be snowed in with Willa, working together to care for the horses and keep the house warm. They talked for hours, learning everything there was to know about each other. Willa told him stories about growing up in Philadelphia, the games she and Margaret played as children, the dreams they had shared. Quinn told her about his own childhood on a farm in Nebraska, how he had come west looking for a fresh start, how he had met Margaret at a church social and known immediately she was special. "You ever feel guilty?" Willa asked one night as they lay in bed. "About being with me when you loved her?" Quinn thought about it carefully before answering. "I did at first, but I think Margaret would understand. She was practical about things like that. She used to say that life was too short to waste on regrets. I wish I could have known her as an adult. I wish we had not fought and lost all those years. She would have been happy to see you again. I know that much." Willa snuggled closer to him. "I used to imagine what it would be like to find her. I pictured us sitting down over tea and catching up on everything. I never imagined it would end like this." "Like what?" "With me married to her husband, living in the house she built, caring for the horses she loved. It feels strange sometimes, like I am living the life that was supposed to be hers." Quinn stroked her hair gently. "You are not living her life. You are living your own life. It just happens to include some of the same pieces." "I hope you are right." "I am right. And Willa, I need you to know something. When I look at you, I do not see Margaret's shadow. I see you. Only you." Willa kissed him then, deep and passionate, and Quinn lost himself in the warmth of her embrace. This was his life now, and he was grateful for it. Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and revealing the greening grassland beneath. Quinn and Willa threw themselves into the work of the ranch, training the new crop of foals and repairing winter damage to the buildings. Willa had proven herself to be every bit as capable as Margaret when it came to working with the horses, and Quinn found that working alongside her was one of his greatest pleasures. In late April, Willa came to him with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Quinn swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and demanded he put her down. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. The baby should come in the fall, around October." Quinn felt tears prick his eyes. He and Margaret had tried for children, but it never happened, and he had assumed he would never be a father. Now, with Willa, he was getting a second chance at everything. "We need to be careful," he said. "No heavy lifting for you anymore." Willa rolled her eyes affectionately. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have babies all the time while still working. Not my wife. I will take care of the heavy work." Over the summer, Quinn watched with wonder as Willa's belly grew round with their child. She bloomed with pregnancy, her face glowing with health and happiness. She continued to help with the horses as much as he would let her, though she grudgingly agreed to avoid the more dangerous animals. In August, they received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 50s stepped down from the stagecoach, well-dressed and looking around Stillwater with an air of disapproval. She asked directions to the Garrett ranch, and Quinn happened to be in town to see it. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. The woman looked him up and down. "Are you Quinn Garrett?" "I am. My name is Helen Winters. I believe you married my niece recently." Quinn felt a jolt of surprise. "You are related to Willa." "No, I am related to your first wife. Margaret was my sister's daughter." Quinn's mind raced. Margaret had never mentioned an aunt, but then again, she had not mentioned a sister either. "Margaret told me she had no family." "She told you wrong. My sister Elizabeth was her mother, married to that wastrel Thomas Reeves. When he drank himself to death and Elizabeth died of a broken heart, I offered to take both girls in. Margaret refused, said she would rather make her own way than accept charity from me." Helen's lips thinned. "I heard recently that Margaret had died and that you had married some woman claiming to be her sister." "Willa is her sister. I have proof." "So I understand. I came to meet her and to make sure she knows about the family." Quinn was not sure what to make of this stern woman, but he could not very well turn her away. "Come with me. Willa is at the ranch." They rode out together in Quinn's wagon, Helen sitting stiffly beside him and making occasional comments about the roughness of the road and the wildness of the landscape. When they reached the house, Willa came out to greet them, her hand shading her eyes against the sun. When she saw Helen, her face went pale. "Aunt Helen." "Hello, Willa. You have grown since I last saw you." Willa walked down from the porch slowly, her hand protectively over her swollen belly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see if the stories were true. It seems they are." "You found your sister too late and married her widower instead. Quite a convenient arrangement." Quinn stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Mrs. Winters, I do not know what you are implying, but I will not have you insulting my wife." Helen raised an eyebrow. "I am not insulting anyone. I am simply stating facts." "Aunt Helen, why are you really here?" Willa asked quietly. The older woman's stern expression softened slightly. "Because you are the only family I have left, whether you like it or not. Your mother was my sister, and both you and Margaret were my nieces. When I heard Margaret was dead, I mourned her even though we had not spoken in years. And when I heard you were alive and married, I decided I needed to see you, to make sure you were all right." Willa stared at her aunt for a long moment, then something in her face shifted. "Would you like to come inside? I can make tea." They spent an awkward afternoon together, with Helen gradually thawing as she listened to Willa's story. By the time evening came, she seemed almost friendly. "I owe you an apology," Helen said finally. "I judged you without knowing the full story. It is clear that you love each other and that this is a real marriage." "Thank you," Willa said. "I would like to stay in contact if you are amenable. I know I was harsh with you girls when you were younger. I regret that now. Perhaps we could start fresh." Willa glanced at Quinn, who nodded encouragingly. "I would like that." Helen stayed in Stillwater for a week, visiting the ranch daily and getting to know Quinn and Willa properly. By the time she left, there was a tentative understanding between them, and Helen promised to return for the birth of the baby. In October, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Willa went into labor. Quinn sent for the midwife and did his best to stay calm as Willa labored through the night. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and tried not to panic when she cried out in pain. Finally, as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry filled the house. The midwife emerged from the bedroom with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Garrett, a healthy boy." Quinn was allowed in to see them, and his breath caught at the sight of Willa holding their newborn son. She looked exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her eyes bright with tears. "We have a son," she whispered. Quinn sat on the edge of the bed and carefully took the baby from her, marveling at how small and perfect he was. The infant had a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "What should we name him?" Quinn asked. "I was thinking William. William Thomas Garrett. For your father and mine." "That is perfect." Quinn held his son and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened him. This was his family now, Willa and William, and he would do anything to protect them. The months that followed were busy and exhausting and wonderful. William was a good baby, but he still required constant attention. Quinn and Willa took turns walking him at night when he fussed, and Quinn discovered a talent for bouncing the baby to sleep that Willa claimed was magical. Helen Winters returned in the spring as promised and spent a month with them, helping Willa and bonding with her great-nephew. She seemed like a different person than the stern woman who had first arrived, softer and more at peace. "I am glad you found happiness," she told Quinn one evening as they sat on the porch. "Margaret would have liked you. She always had good taste in men." "I would have liked to meet her," Helen continued. "My niece, I mean. I should have tried harder to reconcile with her before it was too late." "She was a good woman," Quinn said. "Stubborn but good. Like all the women in our family, apparently." Helen smiled slightly. "Willa is stubborn too in her own way, but she has a good heart. You are lucky to have her, I know." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. William grew from a baby into a toddler, learning to walk and then to run through the grassland. He loved the horses from an early age, just like his mother and his father. Quinn would often find him in the barn, patting the noses of the gentle mares while Willa kept a watchful eye on him. When William was 3, Willa told Quinn she was pregnant again. This time, Quinn was less anxious and more excited. The second baby, a daughter they named Emily Rose, arrived in the spring of 1888. She had Willa's auburn hair and Quinn's gray eyes, and she completed their family in a way Quinn had not known was missing. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Quinn's reputation for raising quality horses spread, and he had more customers than he could handle. He hired 2 young men from town to help with the work, and the Garrett Ranch became known as one of the best horse operations in Montana Territory. Willa thrived as well, balancing motherhood with her work on the ranch. She had a gift for managing the business side of things, keeping the books and negotiating with buyers in a way that made Quinn grateful he had married such a capable woman. Together they built something that neither could have created alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Willa into town for a rare night away from the children, who were staying with Martha Jensen. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant and then walked through the quiet streets of Stillwater, hand in hand. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked. "Coming here, marrying me, building this life?" Willa stopped walking and turned to face him. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. Even though you never got to reconcile with Margaret, I think, in a way, I did. I learned about her life, about the woman she became, and I got to live in the place she loved, with the man she loved. That is a kind of reconciliation, is it not?" Quinn pulled her close and kissed her, right there on the main street of Stillwater, not caring who might see. "I love you, Willa Garrett." "I love you too, Quinn. Always." They walked back to the hotel together, and Quinn thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. He had lost Margaret and thought his heart would never heal. Then Willa had appeared, claiming to be a sister he had never known existed, and somehow she had put him back together piece by piece. It did not matter any more whether he had believed her story at first, whether it had been true or false. What mattered was what they had built together in the years since. Montana Territory became the state of Montana in 1889, and the Garrett family celebrated along with the rest of Stillwater. William was nearly 7 now, and Emily was a precocious 4-year-old who could already help her mother in the garden. Quinn looked at his children and saw the future stretching ahead, bright and full of possibility. Helen Winters continued to visit regularly, growing closer to Willa with each passing year. She became a beloved grandmother figure to William and Emily, spoiling them with gifts from back east and telling them stories about their mother and aunt when they were young. "I wasted so many years being bitter," Helen confided to Willa during one visit. "I wish I could go back and do things differently with you girls." "We cannot change the past," Willa said gently, "but we have now. That is what matters." In 1892, Quinn turned 45, and Willa organized a surprise party for him at the ranch. She invited everyone they knew in Stillwater, and the house was packed with friends and neighbors. Sheriff Morris, now retired, made a toast. "To Quinn Garrett, one of the best men I know." And to his wife, Willa, who had the good sense to show up in Stillwater all those years ago and refuse to leave. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Quinn looked around at the assembled crowd, at the life he and Willa had built, and felt profound gratitude wash over him. He had been given a second chance at happiness, and he had not wasted it. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Quinn and Willa sat on the porch together watching the stars. "You ever think about Margaret?" Willa asked quietly. "Sometimes," Quinn admitted. "But not with sadness anymore. I think about her with gratitude because she led you to me." "That is a nice way to think about it." "It is the truth. If she had not been my wife, you never would have come looking for her, and I would have spent the rest of my life alone." Willa rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to feel guilty about being happy with you, like I was taking something that should have been hers. And now I know that is not how love works. There is enough love to go around. I can love my sister's memory and love you too." "They do not cancel each other out." Quinn kissed the top of her head. "You are a wise woman, Willa Garrett. I learned from experience." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. An owl hooted from the cottonwood tree near the house. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. "Quinn," Willa said after a while. "Yes. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for letting me stay even when you did not know if you could trust me." "Best decision I ever made." "Second best. First best was marrying Margaret because that brought you here where I could find you." Quinn smiled in the darkness. "Fair point." As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, Quinn reflected on the unpredictable nature of life. 10 years ago, he had been a lonely widower with no hope of happiness. Then a woman had stepped off a stagecoach claiming to be his dead wife's sister, and everything changed. Whether the story was true or not had ceased to matter almost immediately. What mattered was that Willa was real, her love was real, and the family they built together was real. The years continued to roll by, bringing the usual mixture of joys and challenges. William grew into a serious, hard-working young man who shared his father's gift with horses. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Quinn and Willa watched their children grow with pride, knowing they had given them the stability and love that both Quinn and Willa had lacked in their own childhoods. In 1895, Helen Winters died peacefully in her sleep during one of her visits to the ranch. She was 73 years old and had spent her last years making up for the distance she had maintained from her family in earlier decades. Willa grieved for her, but she was also grateful that they had reconciled before it was too late. "At least I got to know her at the end," Willa said as they stood by Helen's grave in the Stillwater cemetery. "At least we had those years together." "She loved you very much," Quinn said. "And she loved the children. She died happy." "I know. That is a comfort." William turned 16 in 1898, and Quinn began teaching him everything he knew about running the ranch. The boy was a quick learner and had already proven himself capable beyond his years. Emily, at 13, was more interested in books than horses, but she still helped out when needed and had a sharp mind for numbers that made her invaluable with the bookkeeping. Quinn was now 51, his hair more gray than brown, but he still worked as hard as any man half his age. Willa was 43, and Quinn thought she was more beautiful now than she had been at 28. She had grown into herself over the years, confident and strong and essential to everything good in his life. One evening in late summer, as they watched the sunset from their usual spot on the porch, Willa said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "We should add on to the house. Build a bigger front room, maybe another bedroom or two." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning something I should know about?" Willa laughed. "No, nothing like that. I was thinking about the future. When William gets married, he will want to bring his wife here, and Emily too, eventually. We should have space for our grandchildren." "Grandchildren," Quinn repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that. So do I." They began the expansion that fall, and by the following spring the house had grown significantly. There was a large new room for gatherings and 2 additional bedrooms built onto the back. Quinn took satisfaction in the work, knowing he was building not just for himself and Willa, but for the generations that would come after. William married in 1900, taking as his wife a sweet-natured girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They had their first child, a son named Joseph Quinn Garrett, in 1901. Quinn held his grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life continuing. He was a grandfather now, passing on his knowledge and his legacy to a new generation. Emily went east to attend college in 1903, something that would have been unthinkable when Quinn first came west. But times were changing, and Quinn and Willa wanted their daughter to have every opportunity. She wrote letters home full of excitement about her studies and about the wider world beyond Montana. Quinn and Willa found themselves alone together again, though now with William and Sarah living in the expanded house, and baby Joseph filling the air with his gurgles and cries. It was different from their early years together, but no less sweet. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. In the spring of 1905, Quinn turned 58. He was still strong and healthy, but he had begun to slow down slightly, letting William take on more of the ranch's operations. Willa was 50, and Quinn still found excuses to steal kisses from her throughout the day, making her laugh and blush like a young woman. "You are ridiculous," she told him affectionately after he swept her into a dance in the kitchen one afternoon. "I am in love," he corrected. "There is a difference. After all these years, especially after all these years." Emily came home that summer with a young man in tow, a lawyer named Daniel Shaw who taught at the college where Emily had studied. Quinn liked him immediately, appreciating his intelligence and the obvious respect he showed Emily. They were married that fall in a ceremony that filled the Stillwater church to capacity. As Quinn walked Emily down the aisle, he felt a bittersweet mixture of pride and melancholy. His little girl was grown now, starting her own life. But he was also grateful that he had been there to see it, that he had been given all these years with his family. At the reception, Willa pulled him aside. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am. How different my life could have been." "Mine too. If I had not gotten on that stagecoach, if I had not found the courage to come looking for Margaret, I never would have met you. But you did, and here we are." "Here we are," Willa echoed, smiling. The years after Emily's wedding were peaceful ones. William and Sarah had 3 more children, giving Quinn and Willa a house full of grandchildren. Emily and Daniel visited regularly from Denver, where Daniel had opened a law practice. Quinn scaled back his work even more, content to let William run the ranch while he enjoyed his grandchildren. In 1910, on their 27th wedding anniversary, Quinn and Willa took a trip to Helena, just the two of them. It was rare for them to leave the ranch, but William insisted he could handle things for a few days. They stayed in a fancy hotel and went to the theater and pretended they were a young couple courting again. "This is nice," Willa said as they strolled through the city streets hand in hand. "Being alone together. We should do it more often. We should. Although I do not know how many years we have left for traveling." Quinn pulled her close. "Do not talk like that. We have plenty of years left." But he knew, as everyone does who reaches a certain age, that time was not infinite. He was 63 now, and while he was still in good health, he could feel his body slowing down. Willa was 55, and though she claimed to feel as young as ever, he saw the way she moved more carefully in the mornings, the way her hands sometimes ached from all the years of hard work. They returned to the ranch determined to make the most of whatever time they had left. Quinn spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and work with horses, just as he had taught their father. Willa started a garden that became famous throughout the county for its abundance of vegetables and flowers. One afternoon in 1912, Quinn was sitting on the porch watching William work with a particularly difficult stallion when Willa came out and sat beside him. "I got a letter today," she said. "From a lawyer in Philadelphia." Quinn looked at her curiously. "About what?" "About that trust my father set up for Margaret. Apparently, after all these years, they finally finished sorting out the estate. The money is mine if I want to claim it." "Do you want it?" Willa shrugged. "I do not need it. We have everything we could want right here. But I was thinking we could use it to set up trusts for the grandchildren, for their education or to help them start their own lives." Quinn smiled. "That is a perfect use for it. Margaret would have liked that. I think so too." They arranged for the money to be transferred and divided among their grandchildren, with Helen Winters's share going to Joseph, William's eldest. It seemed fitting somehow, a way of honoring all the complicated family connections that had brought them together. In the spring of 1915, Quinn fell ill with pneumonia. For a frightening week, Willa sat by his bedside watching him fight for every breath. The doctor was pessimistic, but Quinn was stubborn. He had too much to live for to give up easily. Slowly, agonizingly, he began to recover. "You scared me," Willa said when he was finally out of danger, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I did not mean to. Do not leave me, Quinn, not yet. We still have more time together." "I am not going anywhere," he promised, squeezing her hand weakly. He recovered fully, though the illness left him frailer than before. He could no longer work with the horses, could no longer do the physical labor he had done his entire life. It frustrated him, but Willa was patient and gentle, reminding him that he had already accomplished more than most men could dream of. "You built this ranch from nothing," she told him. "You raised 2 wonderful children. You have 4 grandchildren who adore you. You have nothing left to prove." Quinn knew she was right, but it was still hard to accept his limitations. He had always been a man who defined himself by his work, and now that was being taken away from him. But gradually, he learned to find satisfaction in other things. In sitting on the porch watching the sun set. In bouncing his youngest grandchild on his knee. In lying beside Willa at night, her hand in his, grateful for one more day together. The years continued to pass. William took over the ranch completely, running it with the same dedication and skill his father had shown. Emily and Daniel had 2 children of their own, a boy and a girl, bringing the total number of grandchildren to 6. The Garrett ranch prospered, expanding to include more land and more horses. Quinn and Willa grew old together, their hair silver, their steps slower, but their love as strong as ever. They had been married for over 30 years, and in that time, they had built a life that neither could have imagined when Willa first stepped off that stagecoach in Stillwater all those years ago. In the summer of 1918, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends from Stillwater and the surrounding ranches. Quinn looked around at the assembled crowd and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I have been blessed," he said during the toasts, his voice not as strong as it once was but still clear. "I lost my first wife and thought my life was over. Then this woman appeared, claiming to be Margaret's sister, and I did not care if it was true. I just knew I needed her in my life. She saved me, gave me a reason to keep going, and blessed me with a family beyond my wildest dreams. I love you, Willa Garrett, more today than I did 35 years ago." Willa was crying openly now, and most of the guests were misty-eyed as well. She stood and walked to Quinn, taking his hands in hers. "You saved me too," she said. "I came here looking for my sister, but I found so much more. I found a home. I found love. I found my place in the world. Thank you, Quinn, for taking a chance on a stranger. Thank you for loving me." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the party continued late into the night. Quinn was tired but happy, sitting with Willa on the porch as the celebration went on around them. "This is a good life," he said quietly. "The best life," Willa agreed. Quinn lived to see his 70th birthday in 1917, and then his 71st and 72nd. He grew more frail with each passing year, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for his family never dimmed. Willa cared for him devotedly, though she was now 70 herself and dealing with her own aches and pains. In the spring of 1920, Quinn caught another cold that turned into pneumonia. This time, his body was too weak to fight it. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family with Willa holding his hand. "I love you," she whispered as his breathing slowed and then stopped. "I will always love you." They buried Quinn in the Stillwater cemetery, next to Margaret's grave. At Willa's request, a third plot was reserved beside Quinn for when her own time came. The entire town turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection people had for Quinn Garrett. Willa lived for another 8 years, cared for by William and Sarah, and visited regularly by Emily and her family. She spent her days in the house she and Quinn had built together, surrounded by memories of their life. She told stories to her grandchildren about their grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. She died in her sleep in 1928, at the age of 73. Her last words, spoken to William the day before, were about Quinn. "Tell your father I am coming to meet him. Tell him I kept my promise to love him always." They buried her beside Quinn, and on the headstone were the words, "Together forever." Their story had come full circle, from that first meeting in Stillwater when Willa claimed to be Margaret's sister, to these final resting places where all three were reunited. The Garrett Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family just as Quinn and Willa had hoped. William's children inherited it, and then their children after that. The story of how Quinn and Willa met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The town of Stillwater grew and changed over the years, but the Garrett Ranch remained a constant presence, a reminder of the love story that had started there so many years ago. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Montana grasslands, people claimed they could still feel the presence of Quinn and Willa, forever watching over the land they had loved and the family they had built together. Their love story was one for the ages, a tale of second chances and unexpected connections, of a woman who showed up claiming to be a dead wife's sister and a cowboy who decided he did not care if it was true. In the end, what mattered was not the circumstances that brought them together, but the life they chose to build day by day, year by year, until death finally parted them and then reunited them again in whatever lay beyond. The Garrett family prospered for generations, their success built on the foundation Quinn and Willa had laid. The horses they raised became famous throughout Montana and beyond, known for their strength and intelligence and gentle temperament. The house they had expanded over the years stood strong against the elements, sheltering generation after generation of Garretts. But more than the physical legacy, Quinn and Willa left behind something more precious. A story of love conquering loneliness, of trust overcoming doubt, of two damaged souls finding wholeness in each other. It was a story that gave hope to everyone who heard it, a reminder that it was never too late for happiness, never too late to start again, never too late to open your heart to love. And in Stillwater, Montana, where it all began, the memory of Quinn and Willa Garrett lived on, a testament to the enduring power of love in the Wild West.